See, today people come to me and say, Sadhguru, can I trust this person? Should I trust that person? I tell them trust is not a checklist. It is a mirror of your own clarity. If you are confused within yourself, every man, every woman will look like a possible danger. Now, when it comes to relationships, especially when intimacy is involved, people try to reduce a whole human being into 3 favorite positions, 3 likes, 3 dislikes. This is dangerous. If you define trust based on what somebody prefers in the bedroom, you have already misunderstood what trust is. Love, intimacy, relationship. These are not about performance, they are about presence. If you cannot sit with a person in silence, if you cannot share your joy without conditions, then no position, no style, no act is going to give you lasting trust. So the real question is not, never trust a woman who likes this or that. The question is, are you capable of creating a space of trust within yourself? Because only then can you share it with another. Trust is not a checklist. This may sound simple, but if you look closely at how most people approach relationships, you will see that they try to measure trust in terms of conditions. They say, if she does this, I can trust her. If he avoids that, then I can rely on him. In other words, they turn trust into a shopping list of behaviors and qualifications. The problem with this is that human beings are not mechanical devices that can be guaranteed by ticking boxes. When you approach trust as a checklist, you are not relating to a living, breathing human being, you are relating to an idea that you want them to fit into. And ideas always disappoint, because life is far richer and more complex than the rigid definitions we impose on it. If you observe your own life, the people you once thought were absolutely trustworthy may have surprised you, and those you once doubted may have stood by you in unimaginable ways. This is because trust is not a fixed contract written on paper. It is a dynamic quality that reflects the state of your own inner clarity. When you are clear and balanced within yourself, you see people as they are, without coloring their behavior with your expectations. In that clarity, you know whom to open yourself to and how much. But when there is confusion inside you, when fear and insecurity cloud your vision, then even the most genuine person will appear suspicious. Consider this: if you carry mistrust within yourself, you will project it onto everyone around you. Even if someone loves you deeply, you will keep questioning their motives, analyzing their actions, and doubting their loyalty. No amount of external reassurance will satisfy you, because the root of mistrust is not in them but in you. This is why reducing trust to a set of conditions is futile. Even if someone meets every condition today, what guarantee do you have that they will tomorrow? And if they fail at one, does that mean they are entirely untrustworthy? Life does not function in such neat categories. Trust, in its true sense, is not about controlling another's behavior. It is about cultivating an inner state where you are willing to be vulnerable, open, and receptive. When you are in that state, trust arises naturally. You no longer need to constantly watch over people or test them. You allow relationships to flow because you understand that no one can guarantee you absolute certainty in life. What you can guarantee is the quality of your own openness. In this sense, trust is less about what others do and more about what you are willing to be. When you trust someone, you are not saying, I have a contract that you will never hurt me. You are saying, even if you hurt me, I am still willing to experience you, because without openness, there is no real life. Without trust, every relationship becomes a battlefield of suspicion. With trust, even mistakes and misunderstandings can be worked through with grace. So when I say trust is not a checklist, I mean that it cannot be reduced to a formula of do's and don'ts. It is not about whether someone matches your conditions, but about whether you are willing to drop your conditions and meet them with clarity. If you are stable within, you will know instinctively whom to walk with and whom to walk away from. Trust is not something that can be guaranteed by the other, it is something you establish within yourself. And once it is established, life becomes a much richer, freer, and more joyful experience. Reducing a person is dangerous because the moment you compress a whole human being into a few traits, preferences, or behaviors, you stop seeing the living complexity of who they are. A human being is not an object that can be summarized by a label or defined by a single choice. Each person is a vast process of body, mind, emotion, and spirit evolving every moment. But the mind has a tendency to simplify. It wants to make quick judgments, to put people into neat categories. This tendency may feel convenient, but it is dangerous because it blinds you to the fullness of another person's reality. When you reduce someone to a single quality, you strip them of their humanity. You might say, he is unreliable because he once broke a promise, or she is not trustworthy because she enjoys this or that habit. Such judgments ignore the depth of experience that shaped that person, the reasons for their choices, and the possibilities they carry within. Life is not so black and white. People are contradictory, layered, and dynamic. Today someone may act in fear, tomorrow in courage. Today they may seem selfish, tomorrow they may surprise you with generosity. To reduce them to a single act or preference is to ignore the vast ocean of possibilities that lies within every human being. The danger of reduction is not only that you misunderstand others, it is that you limit your own capacity to relate. When you define someone narrowly, you relate only to that definition, not to the person themselves. This creates shallow relationships where genuine connection is impossible. For example, if you decide a person is trustworthy only if they meet certain criteria, you will constantly monitor them against that list rather than experiencing them as they are. This builds a wall between you and them, a wall made of suspicion and judgment. The relationship becomes transactional instead of transformative. Reduction is also dangerous because it feeds prejudice. Much of the conflict in the world arises from reducing people to categories: race, gender, religion, nationality. Instead of seeing a living being, people see a label and act out of assumption. The same mistake plays out in intimate relationships, where one partner reduces the other to roles or habits, forgetting that a human being is far more than these surface attributes. When you approach life this way, you miss the chance to experience the richness of who someone truly is. To truly see a person, you must hold your definitions lightly. You must be willing to sit with the unknown and allow their complexity to unfold before you. This does not mean you ignore harmful behavior or abandon discernment, but it means you refuse to shrink them into a caricature of themselves. You remain open to their growth and transformation, just as you remain open to your own. Every human being carries both shadow and light. To reduce them to one or the other is to cut reality in half, and life never functions in halves. If you look within yourself, you will see that you too are constantly changing. What you thought 10 years ago is not what you think today. The things you liked yesterday may no longer interest you now. Imagine if someone judged you only by the choices you made long ago and refused to see your growth. Would that not be unfair? In the same way, reducing others denies them the freedom to evolve. To honor the fullness of another is to recognize their contradictions, their struggles, and their possibilities without rushing to simplify. This is where true intimacy begins. It is only when you stop reducing someone that you can meet them in their wholeness. And when you meet someone in their wholeness, trust and connection no longer depend on rigid definitions. They flow naturally, because you are no longer relating to an image but to a living being. Presence matters more than performance because at the heart of human connection, what truly touches us is not the grand gestures or flawless execution of an act, but the depth of attention, sincerity, and being that someone brings into the moment. In relationships, particularly intimate ones, there is often too much focus on the idea of performance. People worry about whether they are doing enough, impressing enough, or meeting some external standard of satisfaction. But in reality, what creates lasting impact is not the performance but the authenticity of one's presence. When you are with someone, your presence is felt not through what you do but through how fully you are there. If your body is in one place but your mind is wandering elsewhere, no amount of perfect words or actions can compensate for that absence. A child does not remember the expensive gifts a parent bought nearly as much as the times when that parent was fully attentive, playing, laughing, and being completely there with them. In the same way, a partner does not remember the technical details of how you behaved in a particular situation as much as they remember the feeling of being seen, valued, and held in your attention. Performance, by its very nature, is outward-looking. It seeks validation, applause, or approval. It comes from a place of wanting to be judged favorably. Presence, on the other hand, is inwardly rooted. It does not seek validation but simply expresses itself in the now. When you are present, you are not worrying about how you appear. You are absorbed in the moment, in the person before you, and in the reality unfolding right now. This creates a sense of authenticity that no amount of performance can replicate. In intimate relationships, performance may create temporary excitement, but presence creates enduring intimacy. You could spend hours perfecting techniques to impress your partner, but if your mind and heart are not engaged, if you are not attuned to their being, the connection will feel hollow. On the other hand, even the simplest gesture, a touch, a look, a moment of silence, can carry immense depth when it is infused with presence. What people long for most is not entertainment or performance, but genuine connection. Performance is about doing, presence is about being. Doing has its place in life, but without being, it loses its depth. Imagine sitting across from someone who is constantly trying to impress you with stories, jokes, or skills. It might amuse you for a while, but eventually, you will crave the simplicity of just being together, of sitting in silence, of sharing space without the need for constant display. This is because true connection comes when the veil of performance drops and the essence of presence is revealed. When you bring presence into any interaction, it transforms it. Even mundane activities become profound. Sharing a meal becomes nourishing beyond food, because the energy of attention is there. Walking together becomes meaningful, not because of the destination, but because of the shared presence. And intimacy becomes a sacred experience, not because of how well it is performed, but because both people are wholly there for each other. This is why presence matters more than performance. Performance can be learned, rehearsed, and even faked, but presence cannot. Presence arises only when you are genuinely invested in the moment, when you set aside your distractions and insecurities to simply be. That presence communicates love more powerfully than words, creates trust more firmly than promises, and nurtures relationships more deeply than any performance could. So, when it comes to love, to friendship, or to any form of human relationship, the question is not, what more can I do? But, how much more can I be? Because in the end, people may forget what you did, but they will never forget how deeply you were there with them. Silence is the test of connection because when two people can sit together without the need to fill the space with words, it reveals the depth and comfort of their bond. Many relationships survive on conversation, entertainment, and constant activity. But the true measure of connection is whether the relationship can hold itself in silence, whether presence alone is enough to sustain intimacy without distraction. Words are often used as bridges, but they can also become masks. People talk to fill emptiness, to avoid awkwardness, or to distract themselves from discomfort. In such cases, speech becomes less about genuine sharing and more about escaping silence. When a bond is shallow, silence feels heavy, even threatening. People begin to worry, why is nothing being said? Is something wrong? They rush to patch the gap with chatter. This reveals that the relationship is leaning on noise rather than standing on presence. But when two people are deeply connected, silence becomes natural, even nourishing. In that silence, there is no pressure to perform, no need to impress, no fear of judgment. Both can simply be themselves. The quiet does not feel empty but full of unspoken understanding, of shared energy, of comfort that goes beyond words. Think of two close friends sitting on a bench watching the sunset. They may not exchange a single sentence, yet both come away feeling deeply connected. The silence itself speaks volumes. In romantic relationships, the ability to share silence is a profound sign of intimacy. The initial excitement of words, laughter, and stories is important, but it is not enough to carry a relationship in the long run. At some point, all the stories are told, all the favorite topics exhausted. If at that point the couple cannot sit together in silence without restlessness, it means their bond is fragile. But if they can sit quietly, watching the world or even doing nothing, and still feel close, it shows that their connection rests not on constant stimulation but on true presence. Silence is also powerful because it reveals authenticity. In conversation, people can hide behind words, craft images of themselves, and maintain distance. But in silence, masks fall away. There is nowhere to hide, nothing to perform. You are simply there, and so is the other person. If the silence feels unbearable, it is often because the bond lacks authenticity. But if it feels peaceful, it shows that both people are comfortable being real with one another, without pretenses or distractions. Moreover, silence allows a different kind of communication to emerge. Beyond words, there are subtle exchanges of energy, expressions through the eyes, gestures, and presence itself. Sometimes what cannot be spoken is felt more deeply in silence. Lovers holding hands without speaking may communicate more than hours of dialogue ever could. Friends sitting quietly may understand each other's struggles without needing explanation. Silence becomes a language of its own, more truthful than words. It is also a test of one's inner state. If you are restless within, silence with another feels suffocating. But if you are at ease with yourself, silence with another becomes natural. This is why silence in relationships is not just about the other person, but also about you. Your ability to enjoy silence with someone depends on your ability to enjoy silence within yourself. If you have not learned to be still on your own, you will demand constant distraction from others. When silence is comfortable between two people, it means the relationship has reached a level of depth where presence itself is enough. There is no hunger for performance, no desperation for validation, no fear of emptiness. Just being together is fulfilling. That is why silence is the true test of connection. If you can sit with someone, say nothing, and yet feel complete, you have found a bond that goes beyond words. Love is unconditional sharing of joy because at its essence, love is not about possession, demand, or bargaining, but about the free overflow of your own inner abundance. When you truly love, you do not approach the other person with a list of conditions they must fulfill before you can be happy. Instead, you bring your own joy into the relationship and share it simply because it overflows from you. In this sense, love is not something you take, it is something you give. Most people confuse love with a transaction. They say, if you make me feel good, then I will love you. If you behave this way, then I will stay. If you do not meet my needs, I will withdraw my affection. This conditional approach turns love into a bargain, and bargains can always be broken. Such relationships are fragile because they depend on constant fulfillment of expectations. The moment those expectations are not met, frustration sets in, and what was called love quickly becomes disappointment or even resentment. True love cannot be so fragile. When love is unconditional, it is not dependent on what the other person does or does not do. It is simply your natural expression. Just as a flower does not decide who deserves its fragrance, love does not calculate who is worthy of its joy. It flows freely because it arises from within you. When you are joyful inside, sharing that joy with someone else is effortless. It is like a lamp that does not choose who should benefit from its light, it simply shines. This does not mean unconditional love is blind or naive. It does not mean tolerating abuse or remaining in situations that harm you. Rather, it means that your love is not a tool of manipulation. You are not using affection as a reward and withdrawal as a punishment. You are not measuring every action of your partner against an internal scoreboard to decide whether they have earned your love today. Instead, your love is constant because it is an expression of who you are, not a reaction to who they are. When love is approached in this way, it becomes liberating for both people. The one who loves feels no burden because they are not performing an act of sacrifice, but simply sharing their natural state of joy. The one who receives feels no pressure because they are not being evaluated at every step. This creates an atmosphere of trust where both can relax into the relationship without fear of failure. In that safety, deeper intimacy and authenticity naturally flourish. Love as unconditional sharing of joy also has a profound impact beyond romantic relationships. When you meet friends, family, or even strangers with this spirit, your presence becomes a gift. People are drawn not to what you do for them, but to the energy of joy that radiates from you. It nourishes them in ways they may not even consciously understand. You may notice that certain people uplift you simply by being around them. It is not because they perform great deeds, but because their joy overflows without condition. The most powerful relationships are built not on need but on sharing. If you enter a relationship because you are empty and want someone to fill you, you will remain dependent and anxious. But if you enter already joyful, you make the relationship a space of giving rather than taking. Two people who both overflow with joy create a bond that is not heavy with expectations but light with celebration. Such love does not drain, it energizes. Ultimately, love as unconditional joy is not something to be found outside, it begins with you. When you are at ease within yourself, when your own heart is full, you cannot help but share it, and when you share without condition, without agenda, without demand, that is when love becomes real. That is when love stops being a word or a promise and becomes a living force that can transform not only relationships but the very way you experience life. Trust begins within yourself because the way you perceive others, the way you relate to them, and the extent to which you can open up in a relationship are all reflections of your own inner state. Many people believe that trust is something another person must earn, as if it is entirely dependent on their actions and behavior. But if you observe closely, you will see that trust is less about what others do and more about the clarity and stability you carry within. When you are filled with doubt, fear, and insecurity, even the most trustworthy person will appear suspicious. When you are balanced within, You naturally recognize who can be trusted and who cannot, without constant anxiety. If your inner world is unstable, trust becomes almost impossible. Imagine someone who carries deep insecurity. No matter how much love or assurance they receive, they will continue to question and doubt. They will analyze every action, every word, and interpret it through the lens of fear. In such a state, trust cannot survive, because the mind is constantly looking for evidence of betrayal. On the other hand, when you are rooted in yourself, when you are at ease within, you do not require endless proof from others. You can extend trust naturally because you are not threatened by uncertainty. Trust within yourself means learning to rely on your own clarity, your own perception, and your own capacity to deal with life. It does not mean being naive or blind. It means being confident enough in yourself that you do not collapse, even if someone else disappoints you. When you know you can handle life as it comes, the fear of betrayal loses its grip. You no longer approach relationships with suspicion because you are not dependent on another person for your sense of stability. You can open up and trust, not because you are guaranteed that nothing will go wrong, but because you know that even if it does, you are capable of facing it. This inner foundation is what gives trust its strength. Without it, trust is shaky, constantly requiring reassurance. You may demand promises, guarantees, or constant demonstrations of loyalty, but these never feel enough. The real solution is not more promises from others but deeper trust within yourself. When you trust your ability to see clearly and respond wisely, you stop placing the impossible burden of certainty on others. You allow them to be human, to make mistakes, and still maintain your balance. Another dimension of trust within yourself is honesty. If you cannot be truthful with your own thoughts and feelings, how can you expect to trust others? Many times, people deceive themselves, pretending to feel one thing while hiding another. This inner dishonesty creates confusion, and confusion breeds mistrust. But when you learn to look at yourself with sincerity, to accept your own flaws and strengths without judgment, you develop a kind of inner alignment. From that alignment, you can meet others with greater openness and trust. Relationships flourish when both people are able to trust themselves first. Instead of clinging to each other out of insecurity, they come together from a place of wholeness. Their trust in one another is not fragile, because it is not built on dependency but on clarity. This creates a space where both can grow without fear, where love and intimacy are not suffocated by suspicion. In the end, trust is not something you demand from others, it is something you cultivate within yourself. It is the natural outcome of inner balance, self-awareness, and confidence in your own ability to live fully. When you establish that trust inside, you no longer live in fear of betrayal. You know that whatever happens outside, you will not lose your center. That is the true foundation of lasting trust.